Have you ever felt like you finally found happiness, only for the past to reach out and try to drag you back into the darkness? This is a story about secrets that refuse to stay buried and the gut-wrenching choices that define a life. It's about a man haunted by betrayal, a woman broken by cruelty, and a little girl who holds the key to their redemption, or their ruin. Prepare yourself, because once you know their story, you'll never look at a stranger in the park the same way again. It's a journey into the depths of heartbreak and the incredible power of a love that refuses to die. Ethan, at 37, was a self-made man. His tech startups in Boston's Seaport District were thriving, but his personal life was a ruin he'd spent years rebuilding. His first marriage to Jessica had been a glossy lie. She was a beautiful phantom who haunted his memory, a woman who spent his money while secretly ending the pregnancies he yearned for. The discovery, delivered by an old friend who ran a fertility clinic, had shattered him. He had thrown her out, endured a brutal divorce, and sworn off love forever. Then he met Clara. At 32, Clara possessed a quiet grace that felt like coming home. She was a graphic designer with a sad, gentle light in her eyes. He knew she was divorced, that her past held shadows she never spoke of, but for the first time in a decade, Ethan felt the ice around his heart begin to thaw. He was ready to risk it all again. He had a velvet box in his pocket and a future planned. What he didn't know was that Clara's shadows were darker than he could ever fathom. Born from an old Money Beacon Hill nightmare with a cruel husband named Richard and a choice that had cost her everything. The autumn sun cast a golden glow over the Boston public garden. A gentle breeze rustled the changing leaves, sending a cascade of red and yellow to the ground. Ethan watched Clara, her face illuminated by a soft smile as she tore pieces from a loaf of bread. The swans and ducks gathered at the edge of the pond, a noisy, expectant audience. He loved these quiet moments with her. The air smelled of damp earth and the distant sweetness of roasted nuts from a street vendor. For the first time since his divorce, the world felt still, felt right. He slipped his hand into his coat pocket, his fingers brushing against the cool, velvet-covered box. Today was the day he would ask her to share all of her tomorrows with him. Her laughter, a sound like wind chimes, carried across the water as a particularly bold duck snatched a piece right from her hand. It was perfect. A perfect, peaceful Sunday, pregnant with a beautiful future. "Excuse me? Can I have a crumb too?" The voice was small, hesitant, and it broke the spell of their perfect moment. They both turned. Standing a few feet away was a little girl, no older than 6. She was thin, dressed in clothes that were clean but visibly worn, a faded purple coat and jeans with frayed cuffs. Her brown hair was pulled back in a slightly crooked ponytail. She clutched the sleeve of her coat with one hand, while the other was tucked deep inside her pocket. Her eyes, wide and serious, were fixed on the bread in Clara's hands. Ethan's heart softened immediately. He was about to offer her the entire loaf when he saw Clara's reaction. The smile vanished from her face, replaced by an expression of utter stillness, as if the world had suddenly stopped turning just for her. She stared at the child, her knuckles white as she gripped the bread. It was more than surprise. It was a profound, soul-shaking shock that made the air around them feel heavy and cold. Ethan smiled warmly at the little girl, disarmed by her polite request. "Of course, you can have more than a crumb. Here you go, sweetheart." He reached over and gently took a large piece of the bread from Clara's frozen grip, offering it to the child. The girl's face lit up with a shy smile. "Thank you," she whispered, stepping closer. As she reached for the bread, her other hand slipped out of her coat pocket to steady herself. The motion was quick, almost unnoticeable, but in that split second, Ethan saw it. Her left hand wasn't fully formed. The fingers were fused together in a small, tight cluster. At the same moment, a gust of wind blew a strand of hair from the girl's face, revealing that her left ear was also malformed, a tiny, curled knot of cartilage. He felt a pang of sympathy for the child, but when he glanced at Clara, his concern turned to alarm. All the colour had drained from her face. She made a small, choked sound, her eyes locked on the little girl with an expression of pure, unadulterated horror. The world tilted on its axis for Clara. The cheerful quacking of the ducks, the distant city hum, the warmth of the sun. It all dissolved into a deafening roar in her ears. The little girl's hand, her ear. They were ghosts from a nightmare she had lived every day for 5 years. A dream of a baby she held for a fleeting moment. A memory poisoned by a doctor's sterile words and her husband's cruel sneer. It couldn't be. A wave of dizziness washed over her. Her breath hitched in her throat, a desperate, silent scream. Her vision tunneled, the vibrant colours of the park fading to a blurry grey. The last thing she saw before the darkness claimed her was the little girl's confused, frightened face. Then nothing. Ethan yelled her name, a sound that seemed to come from a great distance. He caught her just as her knees buckled, her body slumping against him like a rag doll. The forgotten bread scattered across the ground, and the ducks descended in a flurry of feathers and noise. The sterile, antiseptic smell of the hospital filled Ethan's senses, a scent he associated with loss and despair. He sat in a hard plastic chair in the emergency room, staring at the scuffed linoleum floor. Clara was in a curtained-off cubicle, being checked over by a doctor. A simple fainting spell, they said. Probably dehydration. But Ethan knew it was more than that. The image of her face before she collapsed was burned into his mind. It wasn't just a swoon. It was as if she had seen a ghost. And the little girl. She had vanished in the commotion. 1 minute she was there, staring wide-eyed at the scene, and the next she was gone, swallowed by the crowd of concerned onlookers. Who was she? And why had the sight of her sent the woman he loved into a dead faint? He replayed the moment over and over. The girl's malformed hand, her ear, and the look of sheer terror on Clara's face. None of it made sense. A cold knot of anxiety tightened in his stomach. The velvet box in his pocket suddenly felt like a ton of bricks. Clara awoke to the rhythmic beeping of a heart monitor and the starchy feel of a hospital gown. For a moment she was disoriented. Then memory came crashing back with the force of a tidal wave. The park, the bread, the little girl, Lily, a name she had only ever whispered into a pillow in the dead of night. She's alive! The thought was a bolt of lightning, electrifying every nerve in her body. He lied. They all lied. She wasn't dead. She was here. She was in this city. A wild, desperate energy surged through her. She had to find her. Now. Tearing the IV from the back of her hand, she ignored the sharp sting of pain. She scrambled out of the bed, her legs unsteady beneath her. The thin gown offered no protection against the cold of the room, but she didn't care. She had to get out. She had to get to her daughter. She pushed aside the curtain and stumbled out into the hallway, her mind a chaotic storm of grief, rage, and a terrifying, fragile new hope. Ethan was talking to a nurse when he saw Clara burst out from behind the curtain. Her face was pale and streaked with tears, her eyes wild with a desperation he had never seen before. "Clara, what are you doing? You need to be in bed." He rushed to her side, trying to gently guide her back, but she fought him, her movements frantic and surprisingly strong. "Let me go, Ethan," she sobbed, pushing against his chest. "You don't understand. I have to go. I have to find her." "Find who? Clara, you collapsed. You need to rest." Her words came out in a torrent, a jumble of raw pain. "You'll leave me if you know. You'll hate me." Ethan held her by the shoulders, forcing her to look at him. "Hate you? Talk to me. What is going on?" Her voice dropped to a shattered whisper, each word a confession that seemed to rip her apart. "That little girl, Ethan, she's my daughter that I thought was dead." The world stopped. Ethan's hands fell from her shoulders, and he stared at her as if she were a stranger. "Daughter." The word echoed in the sterile hallway, stripping the air from Ethan's lungs. Daughter, a child Clara had never mentioned, a child he never knew existed, and in that instant the fragile trust he had so carefully rebuilt over the last year shattered into a million pieces. The face of his ex-wife Jessica swam before his eyes, her beautiful, smiling, deceitful face. He remembered the day he found out about her secrets, the casual cruelty of the truth. He had poured his heart out to her for years about wanting a family, about his dreams of a child, while she had been secretly erasing them from existence. The betrayal had carved a canyon through his soul, and now, Clara, the gentle, honest woman he loved, was telling him she had a secret child. The pain was so sharp, so familiar. It was dizzying. His past wasn't just haunting him, it was repeating itself, a cruel, cosmic joke with him as the punchline. His face hardened, the warmth draining away, replaced by a cold, protective mask. He was back in his old friend's office at the fertility clinic, the scent of leather and expensive scotch in the air. Dr. Mark Hayes, his childhood friend, had looked at him with pity in his eyes. "Ethan, are you sure you're still with Jessica?" he had asked, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "Of course, why?" Mark hesitated, the code of doctor-patient confidentiality at war with his loyalty to a friend. "Look, this is highly unethical, but I can't let this go on. Your wife, she's been a patient here, but not for fertility treatments. Ethan, she's had 2 abortions with us in the last 3 years." The glass in Ethan's hand had nearly slipped. 2, while he was working himself to the bone to build a life for them, for their future children, while she was consoling him, telling him it just wasn't their time yet. The rage had been a white-hot flash, followed by a cold, hollowing emptiness. He had gone home that night and confronted her, her denial, her lies, and finally, her venomous confession, "I'm not a broodmare, Ethan. I want to live my life." The memory was so vivid it felt like it was happening right now. The same sick feeling of betrayal churned in his gut. He looked at Clara, her tear-stained face pleading for an understanding he could no longer give. All he could see was another woman with a life-altering secret. Another lie. "You have a daughter?" he said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. "And you never thought to tell me?" Clara flinched as if he'd slapped her. "Ethan, please, it's not what you think. I can explain." But he couldn't hear her. He could only hear the echoes of Jessica's excuses. He took a step back, shaking his head slowly. The chasm between them felt miles wide. "I can't do this," he whispered, more to himself than to her. "I can't do this again." Without another word, he turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing down the long, empty corridor, leaving Clara standing alone, her pleas lost in the silence he left behind. He had to get away before the past completely consumed him. A cold, numbing despair settled over Clara as she watched Ethan walk away, but the despair was quickly consumed by a more powerful, primal force, the pull toward her child. She hailed a taxi with a trembling hand, the driver giving her a strange look for her hospital gown and bare feet, but she didn't care. She gave him the address of the only place that made sense, the Willows Group home, a name she'd seen on a flyer in a coffee shop once, a place she never dreamed she would visit. The building was an old, brick institution, clean but imposing. She pushed open the heavy wooden doors and was met with the smell of floor polish and institutional cooking. A woman at a reception desk looked up, her expression tired. "Can I help you?" Clara's voice was hoarse. "I need to see the director. It's about a child. Her name might be Yana, or maybe Lily. I don't know what they call her. She has a special hand." She knew she sounded insane, a frantic woman in a hospital gown, but she couldn't stop the words from spilling out. She was led to a small, cluttered office. The woman behind the desk, Miss Albright, had sharp, intelligent eyes and a no-nonsense demeanour. She listened to Clara's frantic, disjointed story without interruption, her fingers steepled under her chin. A blanket had been draped over Clara's shoulders, but she still shivered uncontrollably. "A little girl in the park," Miss Albright repeated, her tone neutral. "And you believe she is your daughter, whom you were told died at birth 5 years ago?" Her voice wasn't accusatory, but it was filled with a professional skepticism that had clearly been honed over many years. "I know it sounds crazy," Clara pleaded, her voice cracking. "But I saw her. I'd know her anywhere. Her hand, her ear. It was exactly what the doctors described. My ex-husband, he told me she died. He made me sign papers." Miss Albright's gaze sharpened. She pulled a file from a locked cabinet. "We have a child here named Lily. She came to us 2 years ago. Tell me everything. Start from the beginning. And do not leave anything out." The story poured out of Clara, a torrent of memories she had kept locked away for 5 years. She spoke of her marriage to Richard Sterling, a man whose family name was practically Boston royalty. He was charming and magnetic in public, but behind the locked doors of their Beacon Hill mansion, he was a tyrant obsessed with perfection. His love was a cage, and she was his prize bird, valued only for her beauty and obedience. She told Miss Albright how he controlled every aspect of her life, her friends, her clothes, her time. When she became pregnant, she thought a child might soften him, might bring some genuine warmth into their cold, perfect home. Instead, it had made him worse. He became resentful of her changing body, disgusted by the physical realities of pregnancy. He wanted the perfect wife, and he had sneered, the perfect child. Any deviation was unacceptable. The office grew quiet as she spoke, the only sound her own trembling voice filling the space with years of repressed pain. A vivid memory surfaced, sharp and painful. Clara was 7 months pregnant, swollen and exhausted. She'd met an old college friend for lunch in the North End, a small act of rebellion. Richard found out. He had waited for her in the grand foyer of their home, his face a mask of cold fury. "How many times have I told you I don't want you waddling around the city like that?" he'd hissed, his voice dangerously low. "You are a reflection of me, and right now you are a bloated, clumsy embarrassment." He had grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into her flesh, and dragged her to a massive, ornate mirror. "Look at yourself. Is this the image of the Sterling family you want the world to see?" The woman staring back at her was a stranger, her eyes wide with fear and shame. That was the moment she understood that his love wasn't just conditional, it was an illusion. He didn't love her, he owned her, and he would expect to own their child too. The birth had been long and grueling. When her daughter was finally born, the room, which should have been filled with joy, fell into a hushed, anxious silence. "What is it? Is she okay?" Clara had asked, her voice weak. The doctors exchanged glances before one of them spoke. "Your daughter is healthy, Mrs. Sterling. However, there are some minor congenital abnormalities, deformities on her left hand and ear." Before Clara could even process the words, before she could even hold her baby, Richard was there. He had refused to be in the room for the birth, but he appeared now as if summoned. He looked into the bassinet, and his handsome face twisted into a mask of pure disgust. "That," he spat, the word dripping with venom. "I will not have that thing associated with my name. You will get rid of it." He turned and stormed out of the room, leaving Clara alone with the devastating weight of his cruelty and the bewildered silence of the medical staff. The days that followed were a blur of psychological warfare. Richard and his parents descended upon her hospital room like vultures. They were smooth, persuasive, their words dripping with a toxic blend of concern and threat. "It's for the best, Clara," his mother had cooed. "A child like that would have no quality of life, and neither would you." Richard was more direct. "You either sign the relinquishment papers, or I'll divorce you and make sure you never see a dime. You'll be on the street, and this creature will be your burden forever." Weak, heartbroken and postpartum, Clara felt her will eroding. One evening, Richard came in with a small paper cup. "You're hysterical. The doctor said you need to calm down. Drink this." She drank the water, which tasted faintly bitter. A strange, pliable calm washed over her. He placed a pen in her hand and slid a document in front of her. His voice was a soothing murmur in the fog. "Just sign, my love. It's all for the best." And she did. A week later, after she was home and the fog had cleared, the full horror of what she had done crashed down on her. She demanded to see her baby. Richard calmly informed her it was too late. He had arranged for the corrective surgery she would need. A few days after that, he came into her room, his face a perfect mask of sorrow. There were complications during the surgery, he said softly. She didn't make it. I'm so sorry, Clara. Her world imploded. The grief was a physical thing, a crushing weight that stole her breath and shattered her mind. She ended up in a private psychiatric hospital, broken. When she was released 2 months later, she filed for divorce, asking for nothing. She just wanted to be free of him, free of the house that had become her prison. She had tried to get the hospital records to find out where her daughter was buried, but was told she had no legal right to the information. Richard had paid for silence, and she had been left with nothing but ghost and guilt. When Clara finished her story, the office was silent. Miss Albright slowly pushed a box of tissues across the desk. Her expression was no longer sceptical. It was one of deep, sorrowful understanding. Coerced surrender under duress and medication, followed by fraudulent notification of death, she said, her voice firm. Mr. Sterling committed a serious crime. She paused, her gaze steady. I believe you, Clara, but the state will require more than a story. The first step is simple and it is absolute. We need to conduct a DNA test. If you are her mother, we will move mountains to make this right. But I must warn you, this will not be an easy fight. A man with Richard Sterling's resources can make things very, very difficult. For the first time that day, a sliver of genuine hope pierced through Clara's grief. It was a long shot, but it was a shot, a chance to reclaim the daughter who had been stolen from her. Meanwhile, Ethan was sitting in his sleek, minimalist apartment, a glass of whiskey untouched on the table in front of him. The city lights twinkled below, but he saw nothing but the ghost of his past and the wreckage of his future. He had replayed their conversation 100 times. Clara's desperation, the raw pain in her voice. It was nothing like Jessica's cold, defiant narcissism. He knew Clara. He knew her kindness, her empathy, her gentle heart. The woman he knew couldn't have abandoned a child. There had to be more to the story, a story he had refused to listen to. The shame hit him like a physical blow. He had been so consumed by his own trauma that he had inflicted it on her. He had seen her at her most vulnerable, pleading for his help, and he had walked away. What kind of man did that make him? He picked up his phone, his thumb hovering over her name. It was too soon to call, too raw. He needed to do something else first. He needed answers. The next morning, Ethan walked into the office of a man named Frank Miller, a private investigator whose reputation was as solid as his bulldog-like physique. The office was messy, smelling of stale coffee and cigarettes, a world away from Ethan's clean corporate environment. I need you to find someone, Ethan said, sliding a piece of paper across the desk. His name is Richard Sterling. I also need you to find out everything you can about his divorce from his ex-wife, Clara Vance. Everything. Hospital records, legal documents, anything that seems off. Money is no object. Frank Miller picked up the paper, his eyes scanning the details. He gave Ethan a long, appraising look. Sounds like you're digging up a grave. You sure you want to know what you'll find? Ethan's jaw tightened. I'm sure, he said, his voice hard as steel. I have to know. He had failed Clara once by letting his past dictate his actions. He wouldn't fail her again. He would find the truth for her, with or without her. The week that followed was the longest of Clara's life. The DNA test was a simple cheek swab, but the wait for the results was agonizing. Every ring of the phone made her jump. Finally, the call came. Miss Albright's voice was warm and clear. It's a match, Clara. 100%. Lily is your daughter. Clara sank onto her sofa, tears of overwhelming relief streaming down her face. She was a mother. It was real. Miss Albright explained that while the legal battle to permanently reverse the fraudulent surrender would take time, the confirmation of maternity and the circumstances of the case were enough. The judge had issued an emergency order. She was being granted temporary custody. She could bring her daughter home. Today. The words were the most beautiful she had ever heard. She was going to bring Lily home. The thought was both terrifying and wonderful. She was finally, truly going to be a mother. Frank Miller found Richard Sterling living in a rundown apartment on the outskirts of the city, a far cry from his former Beacon Hill glory. Bad investments and a gambling addiction had stripped him of his family's fortune. He was a ghost of his former self, bitter and reeking of cheap whiskey. Frank didn't need to be subtle. He laid out the facts, the evidence he'd already uncovered about the suspicious hospital paperwork and the large, untraceable payment made to a doctor who had conveniently retired to the Caribbean. "The woman you lied to knows her daughter is alive," Frank said, his voice gravelly, "and her new boyfriend has very deep pockets. Right now, this is a civil matter, but it could very easily become a criminal one. Fraud, kidnapping by deception, those carry serious prison time." Richard, trapped and pathetic, started talking. He confessed everything, his words slurring together in a pathetic litany of self-pity and blame, all captured on a high-quality hidden microphone. Ethan listened to the recording Frank sent him, a knot of ice forming in his stomach. Richard's whining, despicable confession painted a picture of cruelty so profound it was almost unbelievable. He had drugged his wife, stolen her child, and then lied about her death, all because she wasn't perfect. The sheer evil of it left Ethan breathless, and Clara, what she must have gone through, the grief, the guilt, the years of believing she was a mother to a dead child. He felt a wave of protective fury so intense it made him shake. He had been a fool, blinded by his own pain. While he was nursing his wounds from Jessica's selfish betrayal, Clara had survived a level of psychological torture he couldn't even imagine. He thought of her in that hospital hallway, broken and alone, and how he had left her there. The shame was a bitter poison in his throat. He had to make it right. He had to prove to her that he was not that man. Bringing Lily home was like bringing a small, wary bird into a new cage. Clara's small but cosy apartment seemed to overwhelm her. She stood just inside the doorway, clutching a small backpack, her eyes wide as she took everything in. Clara had spent the last 2 days in a frenzy of preparation, buying a small bed, toys and clothes. The centerpiece was a beautiful doll, almost as big as Lily herself, sitting on the new bed in a lacy pink dress. "This is all for you, sweetie," Clara said gently, her heart aching with a mixture of love and anxiety. Lily cautiously walked over to the bed and stared at the doll. "Is she mine?" she whispered, as if afraid the answer would be no. "She's all yours," Clara confirmed, her voice thick with emotion. Lily reached out a hesitant hand and touched the doll's soft hair. In that small, quiet moment, in the safety of their own home, a bond that had been violently severed 5 years ago began to tentatively, miraculously reform. That night, over a dinner of macaroni and cheese, a meal Clara had learned Lily loved, the little girl grew quiet. She pushed a noodle around her plate before looking up at Clara, her expression serious. "Why did you pick me?" she asked. "There are other kids at the Willows, kids who don't have a funny hand." The innocent question was a dagger to Clara's heart. She took a deep breath, knowing that this was a moment that would define their future. Lies were what broke them apart. The truth had to be what brought them together. "A long time ago," Clara began, her voice soft, "I had a baby girl, but some very unkind people lied to me and told me she went away forever. I was so sad. I looked for her for years, and then, one day in the park, I found the most wonderful, brave and beautiful girl in the whole world, and I realized she was my daughter. It was you, Lily. It was always you." Lily's eyes filled with tears, but they weren't sad tears. She climbed off her chair, ran to Clara and wrapped her small arms around her neck. "I knew you'd find me," she sobbed. "I knew it." Ethan looked at the private investigator's final report. It contained a full transcript of Richard's confession, copies of bank transfers, and a current address for the retired doctor in the Bahamas. It was a slam-dunk case. He forwarded the entire file to a top-tier family law attorney he knew, with instructions to give Clara whatever resources she needed. Justice would be served, but that wasn't enough. The legal side was easy. The personal side was a minefield of his own making. He had hurt Clara deeply. An apology felt inadequate, a pathetic offering in the face of her immense suffering, and his own colossal failure to trust her. He didn't deserve her forgiveness, but he knew with a certainty that settled deep in his bones that he couldn't live without trying to earn it. He had to see her. He had to face her and Lily, and pray that it wasn't too late to fix the damage he had done. While Lily slept, Clara sat at her laptop, the glow of the screen illuminating her worried face. She had spent hours researching pediatric plastic surgeons, her heart sinking with each website she visited. The procedures to correct Lily's hand and ear were complex, multi-staged, and astronomically expensive. The numbers on the screen blurred together, a wall of zeros that seemed insurmountable. She looked at the small pile of jewellery on her desk, the last remnants of her marriage to Richard. Selling it wouldn't even make a dent. She could take out loans, work 3 jobs, sell her apartment if she had to. She would do anything. Lily had been dealt an unfair hand in life, a mark of her father's cruelty. Clara was determined to give her every chance at a future where she wasn't defined by it. She would find a way. She had to. For Lily, she would move heaven and earth. A few days later, Lily announced she wanted to bake cookies. Clara, who was a disaster in the kitchen, hesitantly agreed. The result was chaotic and joyous. Flour dusted every surface, including their hair and faces. An egg, intended for the bowl, missed entirely and splattered on the floor, sending them into a fit of giggles. The smoke alarm went off twice. In the midst of the happy mess, the doorbell rang. Clara's heart skipped a beat. They weren't expecting anyone. Wiping her flour-covered hands on her jeans, she opened the door. It was Ethan. He stood on her doorstep, looking uncertain and holding a bouquet of flowers. An awkward, heavy silence fell between them, thick with unspoken words. Then, Lily peeked out from behind Clara's legs, her face smeared with chocolate. She looked at Ethan's stunned expression, then back at her mum's messy state, and let out a delighted, high-pitched laugh. The sound was so pure, so infectious, that it shattered the tension in an instant. Later that evening, after the kitchen was clean and Lily was sleeping soundly, her new doll tucked in beside her, Ethan and Clara sat in the quiet living room. The smell of slightly burnt cookies lingered in the air. Ethan finally spoke, his voice low, and full of a shame that was painful to witness. "Clara, there are no words to say how sorry I am. What I did at the hospital was unforgivable. My past with Jessica, it poisoned me. I saw betrayal where there was only pain. I saw a lie where there was a tragedy. I failed you when you needed me most, and I will spend the rest of my life regretting it." He looked at her, his eyes pleading. "I don't expect you to forgive me, but I had to tell you." Clara listened, her heart aching. She was still hurt, but seeing his raw, genuine remorse, she understood. He was a man scarred by his own past, just as she was by hers. "I understand, Ethan," she whispered. "But you have to understand. I have her now. She's my whole world. It's not just me anymore." "I know," Ethan said, nodding. He leaned forward, his expression earnest. "Clara, that's just it. I don't want it to be just you. When you love someone, their problems become your problems. Their world becomes your world." He hesitated for a moment, then continued. "I took the liberty of making a call. That friend of mine, Mark, the one who runs the clinic, his brother is one of the best pediatric reconstructive surgeons in the country. He's reviewed Lily's case files, the ones from the hospital. He says he can help. He's confident he can give her full function of her hand. He wants to meet with us." He emphasized the last word. Us. Clara stared at him, tears welling in her eyes. It wasn't just the offer of help, the impossible solution to an overwhelming problem. It was the word, us. He wasn't running from her complicated life. He was stepping into it, ready to face it with her. In that moment, she knew. Her broken pieces and his broken pieces could fit together, creating something new, something whole, a family. In the end, it wasn't about forgetting the scars of the past. It was about realising that those scars told a story of survival. Ethan and Clara, brought together by chance and nearly torn apart by their own ghosts, found a new beginning in the eyes of a little girl who had survived the worst of it all. The road ahead wasn't easy. There were surgeries, therapy, and legal battles. Richard Sterling faced the consequences of his actions, his name forever tarnished. But through it all, they were a unit, a family forged not by blood alone, but by choice, by forgiveness, and by a love strong enough to heal the deepest of wounds. They had found their way back to that perfect day in the park, not as two separate people, but as three souls bound together, ready to face whatever came next. Thank you so much for joining us on this emotional journey. If this story touched your heart, please show your support by hitting that like button, subscribing to the channel, and leaving a comment below. We love hearing from you. What do you think is the hardest thing to forgive, a lie or a betrayal?